Swadee Chao! I'm Pim Kemasingki, editor of City Life, and I'm back on my daybed today with a very special guest, and for once, someone who I've just met literally 3 minutes ago. So this is Gibin Hong of the Carl
Polanyi Institute, Asia. I used to be.
In Seoul. So can you tell us a little bit about your institute and what do you do and who you are?
Okay, so I am trained as a political economist, and especially in terms of the global politics and global economics, and I have been a huge fancier and follower of Carl Polanyi, a Hungarian political economist who lived in 20th century and who wrote a very famous book called The Great Transformation. And when I went back to my home country, which is South Korea, I decided to let other people know about Carl Polanyi's work more and trying to make them see what is happening in the world through the lens of the Carl Polanyi's idea. And there is one institute in Montreal in Canada, which is called the Political Economy Institute of Carl Polanyi in Montreal.
Okay.
And the people working there closely worked with me 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And we cooperated and we instituted the Carl Polanyi Institute Asia in Seoul in order to, disseminate the Carl Polanyi's idea in Asian network. And I work there. I don't work there anymore, but I strongly keep that aspiration.
Could you, because I have obviously, from the way I couldn't even pronounce his name, I haven't heard of Carl Polanyi. So for lay people like me, could you please explain to me, what is it about his philosophy or thinking that we should know about?
I could put it in a very short, very small nutshell. That is the
layman's term.
Yeah, sure. Very basic idea of it is, there are 3 things in our world that can never be commodities. First one is human being.
Never become a what?
Commodity.
Yeah,
something to sell and buy.
Yeah, human being.
First thing is the human being. Second thing is nature. And third one is money. So, logic, why it covers, money cannot be bought and sold is somewhat complicated, but you can intuitively know that nature and human beings are not for sale. It's a kind of intuitive thing.
Money?
Well, money is a different thing. It is about the 19th century gold standard monetary system. So it is a very far story from us in the 21st century. Anyway, but the thing is, since the beginning of the 19th century, in the Industrial Revolution period, human beings have been devising the economic system that are based upon the commodification of human beings and commodification of nature.
Yes.
That is what we call market economy, market capitalism. And there is a backfire of it. That is, human beings, nature, are fighting against the capitalism and market economy in order to keep their identities as non-commodities.
Right.
So market economy is ambiguous, and it is like separated between the 2 personalities. Modern civilization, on the one hand, is trying to build the market economy on the one hand.
Right.
On the other hand, it is fighting against the market economy on the other hand.
Oh.
So it is like a Gollum and Smeagol thing in the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
The same person is sometimes Gollum and sometimes Smeagol.
God, that's a bit depressing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very depressing. And the aftermath of this depressing picture was the World War I, World War II, rise of fascism, rise of communism. So that book was published in 1944, and the lesson of that book is we need to build the human civilization based upon the totally different principle other than commodifying human beings and nature.
So are you saying that it's cyclical, perhaps, and we're now heading towards another potential...
Yes. Carl Polanyi died in 1964, so he never saw that kind of cyclical things happening again. But we are witnessing in 2022, that kind of rebuilding of the chaotic transition now.
And now, I mean, it seems to be going at exponentially the speed, right? So how are we going to rein it in? I mean, did he offer any solutions, or is it just like a really
No, he
sad
just described
prediction?
it. He just described, and one bad thing about his view, and Peter Pogany is another Hungarian economist who was in a very close tradition with Karl Polanyi. According to them, this kind of a systemic chaos is not something that we can prevent. It is going to happen anywhere.
So in history, how many times has this, I mean, can you give us, okay, there is the big fascism, but what about before that?
Okay, it is the explanation of Peter Pogany, another Hungarian economist. According to him, first kind of a global chaotic transition we saw was between French Revolution in 1789 and the final defeat of the Napoleon in 1814. That was the first chaotic transition of the global system into 19th century global system.
How so?
Yeah.
How did that have that impact?
Okay, so let me explain this. Now, first, the global system in European world, maybe it had emerged in the 15th century or 16th century, the world market economy. But it had a serious crisis between because of the conflict between Britain, England, and France, and so on. So the conflict was rising, and the final aftermath of it was the collapse of the whole system at the mercantilist period of the European system in 18th century. And aftermath of it was the French Revolution and the rise of the Napoleonic type of republic and empire.
So the rise of the Napoleonic Empire, that in itself was
that was the chaotic transition.
Okay, but isn't that just the nature of humanity, that we generate chaos?
That's a cyclical thing. Well,
what are the predictors of this cycle?
This cyclical thing, if it happens in the systemic scale, it is something we cannot prevent, unfortunately. It is just happening. It's just a historical big thing. It's like rise and decline of the Roman Empire and rise and decline of the Han Empire and so forth and so on. So there is another thing that we should concentrate our energy and focus, that is the finding out the seed of the new emerging order.
So you say chaos is inevitable. So right now we need to find the seed of
so there is no going back.
Is going to come out.
There is no going back, and there is no preventing what is going to happen.
So what are these seeds, and what can we do to mitigate our own suffering from the chaos?
I think the seed of the new principle of socio-economic order. Let me take an example. After the World War I, that was actually the second chaotic transition after the long period of the British type of global capitalism.
Right.
After the First World War, what should have happened was trying to find a new emerging order. But on the contrary, after the Versailles Treaty, all the summit of the European countries were desperately trying to revive what existed in the 19th century. That was what happened in the 1920s. Yeah. But especially already at the time, some people who are very visionary about the future order were talking about the industrial democracy, economic planning, and so guild socialism and some other entirely new type of a socio-economic order. But those voices were entirely ignored during the 1920s. But you see, voila, in the 1930s, what actually replaced the existing order was industrial democracy, economic planning, and the rise of the social democracy and so on. So I think if I go back to the 1920s, what I would do is not trying to revive the laissez-faire capitalism of the 19th century. Rather than, I would see the possibility of the new socio-economic order and trying to enhance the possibility, trying to disseminate the idea of the new kind of the socio-economic order and so on. There is no going back, but there is no preventing.
Would that have prevented the chaos that was the Second World War? I mean, would that...
If we are soon enough to find out the possibility of the new emerging order, we would have been able to avoid that real big the tragedies like fascism or Second World War.
So
But
what are the signs now? Who are the voices now, apart from yourself, that we should be listening to? What are these seeds that are emerging that we need to cling on to or study?
Well, at this moment, I need to refer to my friend over here. That is the.
I've interviewed him already, so I'll put a link.
Okay, so that is what I am saying.
Yeah.
We have gone through the state-centered socialism in the 20th century, and we have also gone through the market-centered capitalism at the end of the 20th century and now. If those two forms of economic order is failing,
Yeah.
then what we should do? We should find a third possible alternative.
But there's no will. Is there any will?
Will. I mean, will comes out. Will is generated only when people are being informed of the new possibility.
So when we're back against the wall, right? What are these exciting ideas now today that you could, give us something happy and positive to hang our hat on? Right?
Let me take an example.
Yeah.
We need to separate two forms of money. So that's what Peter Pogani suggested in his book. Before the 1930s, there is only one form of money, that is money based upon the gold standard. And after the Second World War, what we have had is actually the fiat form of money, that is not backed by the gold or some other precious metal, but whose value is only backed by the command of the central government. Right. And this fiat money system has been dominant since the 1970s for maybe more than 4 decades. But nowadays, with this instability of the global financial system based upon the dollar standard and so on, maybe we need to, separate this different kind of monetary system. One of which could be working in the local basis, and other form may be working in the global basis.
Which is already happening.
Actually, it is happening.
This modern currency is coming out, right?
It's actually happening, and it seems like more likely than in this time of inflation, with the very rapid inflation, some desperate small local communities might be, inventing and using their own monetary system.
Yeah.
So that is one possibility, but existing mindset does not see it as a legitimate one.
No.
It should be abolished and it should be destroyed, but we should open our mind about the future possibility of entirely different forms of economic.
I feel like governments are so far behind. They're so sluggish in adopting these principles, these new,
I think it is related to another issue that we talked about, Michelle and I talked about in our tuk-tuk in our way to here. That is the crisis of the legitimacy of representative democracy.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, representative democracy, the legitimacy should be based upon its ability to organize the discussion of public people about what is our common good, what is our general political will, and what do we want the political collectively kind of thing.
How's it gone so wrong?
Nowadays, representative democracy does not deserve its name of democracy. It is only functioning as a kind of instrumental organizations to take care of their financial stability and budget process and so forth and so on. So this kind of legitimacy of the representative democracy is aggravating the situation more.
How did we get to this point? Because the ideal of democracy seems pretty straightforward, right? I mean, it's a pretty common sense of thing. But yet you look globally right now, especially in the last 2 years when our leaders have failed us just across the board pretty much. I mean, I don't even understand how we could have got such a bunch of awful leaders. But how did the system itself get corrupted, or was it the people that corrupted it? Or is there any way that this system could work? Or do we just need to give it up and start with something else?
Why don't you forget about for the time being, forget about the possibility of changing the government or the fighting against the market economy for the time being.
Okay.
Because, believe me, I have been doing it for more than 3 decades, but I have had no success whatsoever.
I know.
And in order to preserve our own energy, why don't we focus our energy on the possibility of creating and generating some small but very sound community in which our political desire and our economic desire can be organized not individually but collectively, although it is a very small size.
Although I feel like this sort of this thing called, the boundaries of nations and nationalism, that is so restricting to a lot of
Right.
this sort of stuff because of the regulations,
Right.
because there's so much that
Right.
patriotism and nationalism.
Global capital, what is really bad about this global capitalism is dominant global capital has eviscerated the real power of the nation state. Nation state used to be a very powerful instrument in the middle of the 20th century. But nowadays, even if we have the socialist or labor government in one country, it cannot do anything very substantial. So we need some kind of a counterweight to the power of the global system. That is global financial capital has so much power in deciding what is happening in our everyday life. And our attempt to fight against it is just helpless, it's not disorganized, it's not organized and not very successful. Then why don't we start from having more influence on organizing our own everyday life? Start from here. So it is virtually impossible to fight against the power of the Morgan Stanley or so forth and so on. But at least we can have some power over how to organize our own everyday life, how to provide the vegetables for our own everyday dinner.
So lessen our reliance on these.
So that we can have some independence from the dominance of the global financial capital. Why don't you start from here?
Yeah.
Can I say something? So one of the advantages of the chaotic transition is the rapidity of the change, right? So you have no change for 100 years, then you have Napoleon coming in, and then within 10 years, the whole system has changed, right? So that's the idea. The chaotic transition is very bad to go through, and it's very costly in human lives.
But
but it's actually the condition for the change to happen. So before the new can be established, the old has to disintegrate.
So you're saying that could potentially be soon-ish, like within.
Well, I have an ambiguous feeling of for pro and con about the possibility. If that happens, it will create a huge tragedy for all the humankind.
Yes.
Many people will die, and many people will suffer from all kinds of crises.
Yeah.
But that might be the only possibility. Some opening up the future old water might be emerging.
So you're talking about death as in from warfare, lack of resources?
Those things are already happening.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. And, geopolitical conflict between Russia and China and the United States, it could, generate anything possible.
Yeah, I mean, look at what's happening in America. It's just been so fast, from what was such a great nation to the mess it is today. Yeah. So, was there anything you wanted to ask me, or you said you wanted to do a?
I just wondered, as Korean people nowadays are suffering from the inflation and so many other things. I would guess that Thailand people are suffering from the same things.
Oh, yes.
Increase of the price of everything, and this frustrating situation of the representative democracy and so on. I just want to hear what are the anxiety and hope or the fear that ordinary Thai people are feeling nowadays. I need to hear something.
Well, we've been in a political turmoil since 2002, when our ex-Prime Minister Thaksin was, a bit after that, but there's been a lot of protests, bloodshed, coups, political shenanigans, and Thailand has, always, frankly, throughout our whole democracy, it's been a mess, and the last 20 years has been more so than ever. And then with the rise of social media, we've had a huge amount of opposition, but yet we still have a very top-down pyramid hierarchical society of the elders, and so there's a lot of layers. It's a bit impenetrable, I think, to the netizens of the world who are just like, online. But I feel like it's transitioning over, or it should be after this pandemic. People will go to the streets, I think. There will be some turmoil because it's enough. We've had one geriatric government after another telling us, what's best for us, and without listening. Inflation is absolutely awful. But thank God Thai people are entrepreneurial. Nearly everyone I know has a side hustle. They're selling something on Facebook to all their friends. They're selling something on the
Two
street.
jobs, three jobs. And
Oh yeah, Thai people are super, especially women, very, very
Especially women.
entrepreneurial, and there's a kind of a getting by attitude that sort of gets us through a lot of our troubles. And there's a big family community network that helps us. So, like you don't see beggars in the streets in Chiang Mai. You don't see that, but it doesn't mean that people aren't suffering deeply.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the one source of the frustration for them is not to see the government acting effectively about this economic situation and so on.
Yeah, the government lectures. The government doesn't
Lectures.
listen. Yeah,
Just a lecture.
it lectures. It tells.
Doesn't listen.
No.
Wow, similar thing happening in Korea. Is our newly elected president. He practiced every day, like doorstepping. That's what he calls. When he opens the window of the presidential, his own office,
Yeah.
he turns back and saying some words to the media every day. And he thinks that is the practice of democracy for him. But that is the source of many people's frustration because there is absolutely no substance in his doorstepping.
God, yeah, I've got one of those here as well. Well, we're going to have some guests arriving soon.
Okay.
And then we're going to set it all up and we'll continue this discussion with more people. So thank you so much,
Thank
Gibin
you.
Hong, all the way from Seoul. And we'll continue our chat.
Okay.
Khun Kha.
Bye.
Thank you.